Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi, and welcome to the ISO Show. Thanks very much for joining me today. Well, over the next few episodes, we're going to be running a mini-series on energy management. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is the fact that we've got the ESOS deadline looming this year, which is in December. So that's the Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme. And the other is that we've seen a huge increase in demand for the energy management standard ISO 50001. Now, that's partly because it's a route to compliance to ESOS, but it's also partly because a lot of organisations are actually getting serious about demonstrating their level of commitment to energy reduction, and also that supports alignment with sustainability strategies to net carbon zero. So I'm going to kick off with this episode just to explain about ESOS, what it is, and the routes to ESOS compliance. And I'd just like to recap on this because we did cover this topic a couple of years ago, but just for those organisations that didn't catch that episode, and also some organisations wouldn't have been eligible for ESOS compliance, but they may be eligible this time round, then yeah, this is for you. So just to begin with then, let's just dive into what ESOS actually is. So ESOS stands for the Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme, and it was launched by the Department of Energy and Climate Change, DEC, back in July 2013. And it was actually established to comply with Article 8, which is an EU Energy Efficiency Directive, which is a 2012-27 EU directive. So this EU directive basically came into effect in 2014 as the ESOS regulations here in the UK. So that was basically to meet European directives. So despite Brexit, and ESOS is still a mandatory requirement. So it's basically a mandatory energy assessment and energy savings identification scheme for what is classed as large enterprises. And I'll be coming on to what qualifies for a large enterprise. So what is a large enterprise? Well, it's defined as having more than 250 employees and/or an annual turnover exceeding €50 million or an annual balance sheet total exceeding €43 million. So that's the criteria. But this is only for the private sector. The public sector is not required to participate. Now, the scheme covers different types of organisations, such as limited companies, partnerships, trusts and not-for-profit bodies, as well as unincorporated associations and publicly listed companies. And ESOS, for those of you that are familiar with it, you'll know that it comes round every 4 years. So the first phase, which was in 2014, that was the time frame that it was the qualification date. So the compliance date was back in 2015 for that. And then we had phase 2 years later, which was 2019. And we're in phase 3, which is 2023, which is the deadline in December this year. So a lot of people might be wondering, why have ESOS? And especially if we're out of Europe now as well, if you're listening to this podcast in the UK. Well, regardless of where you're located in the globe, energy reduction is important. And it's vitally important that businesses understand what energy they're actually consuming, because there are still a hell of a lot of businesses out there that haven't got a clue. So ESOS has been established because it's estimated that it's going to lead to 1.6 billion net benefits to the UK alone. So ESOS Energy Audits have the potential to increase business profitability and competitiveness. And of course, one of the key aspects of this is that it helps to identify energy efficiency measures. But what do you need to do to comply with ESOS? Well, in simple terms, an ESOS assessment requires you to do 3 things. Number 1 is measure your total energy consumption. Number 2 is to conduct energy audits to identify cost-effective energy efficiency recommendations. And thirdly, to report that compliance to the Environment Agency, because they're the scheme administrator in the UK. But if you're listening to this in other countries in Europe, it will be whatever the regulatory body or scheme administrator is in your country. So it's quite simple. You just need to do those 3 things. But there are actually 2 main routes to complying with ESOS. You can go down the ESOS audit route, which is basically where you carry out an ESOS energy audit and you'll provide recommendations for energy reductions as a result of that audit, which is a one-off exercise. Or the other route is to go down the ISO 50001 route. So if you're already certified to ISO 50001, you don't have to go through the ESOS energy audit part of it, because you're already going above and beyond energy audits, because you've got an energy management system in place, which is all about continuous improvement, and you're continually monitoring your energy consumption. And you're also actively managing your energy reductions. So for this podcast, I'm just going to be talking about the ESOS audit route. And in the next episode, I'm going to be talking about ISO 50001. We're going to be looking at, over the next few episodes, a bit more information about 50001 as well, such as the benefits, give you some case studies on organisations that have implemented it and what the return on investment have been and what the positive impact has been on our planet. So that's another episode that I'll be doing, because we haven't got time to fit all of that in today. And we're also going to be talking about how to implement ISO 50001 later on in the series as well. So for now, I'm just going to explain a little bit more about what's involved with an ESOS energy audit. So with an ESOS energy audit, you need to take 12 months of energy consumption data. You need to provide cost-effective recommendations for the areas that have been audited within scope, and that needs to be overseen and reviewed by an ESOS lead assessor. So you may have one of those within your organisation. If you don't, at Blackmores we can provide you with an ESOS lead assessor, and we can actually do the ESOS energy audits along with, of course, implementing ISO 50001. So what sort of things do we look at from an energy management point of view? Well, it's quite obvious one of the first things that we'll look at is the actual buildings. So what are we looking at within the buildings? Well, we're looking at heating, ventilation, air conditioning, lighting, the fabric of the building, and also the controls that you have for the building. Okay, so some examples of some energy efficient initiatives around those things that could help to save you money. If we look at heating, for example, one which is just common sense is to turn the heating down. And you can hear me kind of laughing here because it is a no-brainer, but it's unbelievable how many businesses just leave their heating on 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And you might say, oh, well, the building's managed by some other company. Well, yeah, but what are you doing to influence that? So just because it's directly out of your control doesn't mean to say that you can't influence that. It could be other things like replacing inefficient boilers, shortening hours of operation, other aspects in terms of heating. And then in terms of ventilation, it could be having higher efficiency motors, reviewing time settings and turning off when it's not in use. Air conditioning, again, that could be looking at reviewing the temperature controls and consider variable speed drives. Maintaining your air conditioning units on a regular basis to ensure that you're optimising efficiency. Lighting, so that could be installing occupancy sensors or installing daylight sensors, and having a maintenance plan so that you're keeping on top of all of that. And of course, replacing your current lights with high efficiency LED lighting. When it comes to the fabric of the building, again, you may have direct influence over this or you may not, but If you do, it's things like installing cavity wall insulation, roof insulation, and installing high-efficiency windows and glazing and draft-proofing. So there are a number of things that you can do. And of course, many organisations will have building control systems, so BMSs, which can help to manage that and automate certain processes. Then, of course, depending on the environment that you're working in, you may have, warehouses, or you may have transportation. So that could be, having fuel consumption that we need to consider, driver fuel performance, routing and scheduling, and maintaining vehicles as well on a regular basis. One of the opportunities that cuts across all organisations are having awareness campaigns for employees, because of course it's humans that are actually managing these assets that are consuming energy, and so they are really instrumental in driving change. So in order to carry out an ESOS energy audit, there are a few things that you need to do. You need to plan the audit. So that's in terms of establishing the scope. You need to do that first of all. Conduct the audit, collect data, do the analysis, identify the opportunities for improvement, pull all the documentation together into your ESOS evidence pack, and then you need to submit that to the Environment Agency. So again, if you need any guidance on support on that, then just get in touch with us. And that's something that we help a lot of clients with every 4 years when the ESOS requirements come around. So the different types of data sources that we look at, there are meter reading records, delivery notes, automatic, half-hourly meters as well. So all of that information is useful. We gather this from lots of different sources across an organisation. So typically a finance team is a first point of call, but also facilities managers, they'll have access to meter readings and invoices. If you travel as a business, you will be able to get information from your travel company if you use one. And also other teams within the business, like maintenance teams or vehicle fleet managers. So I mentioned earlier on about the scope. So you do need to specify what the scope and boundaries of the audit actually is, and the methodology that you're using for your data collection, analysis and recommendations. So within that, you're going to be looking at sources of data and identifying whether there are any gaps through any estimations. So once you've identified the scope and boundaries, you've documented your methodology, you've identified your sources of data and documented everything in your evidence pack, you need to get that signed off by a member of the leadership team, typically a director, and also an ESOS energy assessor as well. And once all of that's been done, then that can be submitted to the Environment Agency. So hopefully that's given you an overview on what's involved with an ESOS energy audit, which is one of the routes to compliance to ESOS. Again, if you'd like any guidance and support on that, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and we'll be more than happy to have a chat with you about it and provide you with some information on next steps. So in the next episode, I'm going to be talking about all things ISO 50001, because it's ISO 50001, which is the energy management system that helps you to continually drive forward improvement in energy management performance. It's not just a one-off. It's not once every 4 years. It's how your business operates. So in the next episode, I'm going to be explaining about what ISO 50001 is, and then we'll be looking at the benefits. And following on from that, there'll be another episode on implementing ISO 50001. So until then, thanks very much for joining me today, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of the ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.